So, Donald Trump just had a complete meltdown in the Oval Office, screaming at congressional leaders who delivered an unprecedented demand that he end his term immediately. And what triggered this explosion? A bipartisan coalition of lawmakers citing the 25th Amendment and invoking emergency powers they claim gives Congress the authority to force a sitting president from office. Multiple witnesses described Trump's face turning red, his voice reaching levels they'd never heard before, as he shouted that no one, absolutely no one, was going to force him out of the presidency he won fair and square. This isn't just another political spat or partisan disagreement. We're talking about members of Congress, including some from Trump's own party, formally demanding that a sitting president surrender power before his term ends. And trust me, what happened in that room when congressional leaders delivered their demand is going to be analyzed and debated for generations. It's honestly hard to believe we're watching a constitutional crisis unfold in real time where the legislative branch is essentially trying to remove an executive through mechanisms never used in American history. Let me fill you in on what's been happening. Tensions between Trump and Congress have been building for months, after a series of executive actions that lawmakers from both parties viewed as constitutional overreach, including attempts to defund agencies without congressional approval and ignoring subpoenas. Members of Congress started discussing what tools they actually had to check presidential power. According to Politico's January 10th report, a group of constitutional scholars briefed key congressional leaders on obscure provisions that some legal experts believe give Congress emergency authority in extreme circumstances. The briefing apparently planted the seed for what became this extraordinary confrontation. But here's where the rubber meets the road. On January 13th, according to CNN's reporting, a delegation of congressional leaders, including the Senate Majority Leader, the House Speaker, and ranking members from both parties, requested an emergency meeting at the White House. Trump initially refused, but after being told they would hold a public press conference on the Capitol steps if he didn't meet with them, he agreed to a closed-door session. And before we go any further, let's be real for a second. When congressional leaders from both parties unite to confront a president with demands he leave office, we're in unprecedented territory. This isn't normal politics. This is a constitutional earthquake. Here's where it gets interesting. According to multiple sources who were present in the Oval Office, the meeting started with the congressional delegation presenting Trump with a formal resolution. CBS News reported that the document, which had been drafted by constitutional attorneys, cited a series of actions Trump had taken that lawmakers argued violated his oath of office. The resolution claimed Trump had exceeded presidential authority so egregiously that Congress was invoking what they called inherent legislative power to protect the Constitution. They demanded Trump agree to end his term within 30 days and allow the vice president to assume the presidency. Trump reportedly sat silent for the first 2 minutes as the Senate Majority Leader read the resolution aloud. According to sources who spoke to NBC News, you could feel the tension building in the room. Trump's jaw was clenched, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. When the reading finished, there was a moment of absolute silence. Then Trump exploded. Multiple sources described him standing up so forcefully his chair rolled backward. He began shouting that Congress had no authority to make such demands, that he was elected by the American people, and that what they were attempting was nothing less than a coup. The bombshell came when the House Speaker calmly responded that they had consulted with constitutional experts who believed Congress did have emergency powers in cases of presidential misconduct that threatened the constitutional order. According to Politico's sources, the Speaker told Trump that if he refused to comply voluntarily, they would move forward with immediate impeachment proceedings in the House, while simultaneously passing a resolution declaring the presidency temporarily vacant due to inability to discharge duties, an interpretation of the 25th Amendment that has never been tested. This wasn't a subordinate suggesting resignation. This was Congress itself attempting to force a president from power through constitutional mechanisms that exist in theory but have never been activated. This sent shockwaves through the room because it transformed what could have been dismissed as political theater into an actual constitutional crisis. Trump's legal team, which was present for the meeting, reportedly began frantically conferring. The White House counsel was overheard telling Trump that Congress was on extremely shaky legal ground, but that fighting this would require immediate Supreme Court intervention. According to MSNBC's sources, Trump responded by pointing at the congressional leaders and shouting that they would regret this, that the American people would never stand for Congress removing their elected president, and that he would fight this with every resource at his disposal. Now, this isn't the first time we've seen Congress and a president locked in constitutional combat. Just think about how the Watergate crisis unfolded with Richard Nixon. As evidence of Nixon's involvement in the cover-up mounted, congressional leaders from both parties eventually went to the White House to tell Nixon he faced certain impeachment and conviction. They essentially told him his presidency was over and that resignation was his only dignified option. Nixon, facing the reality that Senate Republicans would vote to convict him, chose to resign rather than endure the humiliation of removal. The difference was that Nixon wasn't forced out. He made a choice when the political ground beneath him had completely collapsed. Then there was Andrew Johnson's impeachment in 1868. Johnson's battles with Congress over Reconstruction policy led to impeachment in the House and a Senate trial that came within one vote of conviction. Congress was attempting to remove a president they viewed as obstructing their legislative agenda and violating the Tenure of Office Act. Johnson survived, but barely, and his presidency was effectively neutered. Congress had shown it was willing to use its constitutional weapons even if the final strike didn't land. And let's not forget the constitutional crisis that almost erupted during Trump's first term when congressional Democrats discussed using the 25th Amendment after various incidents they claimed showed unfitness for office. Cabinet members were reportedly asked whether they would support invoking the amendment, which requires the vice president and a majority of the cabinet to declare the president unable to discharge his duties. Those discussions never materialized into action, but they showed that the 25th Amendment had moved from theoretical constitutional provision to active political consideration. Now it looks like this congressional delegation has taken those previous confrontations to an entirely new level. The pattern is unmistakable. When presidents push constitutional boundaries too far, Congress eventually pushes back. But we've never seen Congress actually try to force a president out through mechanisms other than traditional impeachment and conviction. This is uncharted territory. So what specifically did Trump do in that Oval Office meeting that witnesses describe as a rage beyond anything they'd previously seen? Let's break it down. According to reporters who spoke with sources present, Trump's fury escalated in stages. He began by loudly rejecting the entire premise, calling it unconstitutional and illegal. His voice was raised but controlled at first. When the congressional leaders refused to withdraw their demand and instead began explaining how they planned to proceed, Trump's volume increased dramatically. He was shouting that they were traitors, that they were attempting to overturn an election, and that history would judge them harshly. Now here's the kicker. When one of the Republican members of the delegation tried to explain that they were acting to protect the Constitution and the Republic, Trump reportedly turned on this individual with particular fury. According to CNN sources, Trump screamed that this Republican would be primaried, destroyed politically, and remembered as a Benedict Arnold. The personal nature of the attack shocked even people who had witnessed Trump's previous outbursts. One source told The Washington Post that Trump was pointing his finger inches from the congressman's face while yelling. The meeting devolved further when Trump's chief of staff tried to calm the situation by suggesting they take a break. Trump reportedly shouted at his own aide to be quiet and accused everyone in the room of conspiring against him. According to NBC News, Trump declared that he would never voluntarily leave office, that Congress had no authority to remove him outside of impeachment and conviction, and that he would take this fight to the Supreme Court immediately. His attorneys were trying to interject with legal analysis, but Trump kept talking over them, returning again and again to his central argument that the American people elected him and only they could remove him through an election. Legal experts who have reviewed accounts of the meeting told MSNBC that Trump's legal position is actually on solid ground constitutionally, even if his behavior was volatile. The Constitution provides specific mechanisms for removing a president, impeachment and conviction requiring a two-thirds Senate vote, or the 25th Amendment process involving the vice president and cabinet. What Congress was attempting, a kind of legislative declaration forcing resignation, has no clear constitutional basis. Harvard law professor Lawrence Tribe, no Trump supporter, stated on CNN that while Trump's actions may have been constitutionally questionable, Congress's remedy was equally, if not more so. But other constitutional scholars argued that Congress was exploring untested emergency powers. University of Texas law professor Sanford Levinson told Politico that the Constitution's impeachment provisions were never designed to handle a president who creates ongoing constitutional crises but hasn't committed clearly impeachable offenses. He suggested that Congress might have inherent authority to protect constitutional order, even if that authority has never been formally exercised. The legal community is genuinely divided on whether Congress has any path to force a president out beyond traditional impeachment. This leaves both Trump and Congress in an extraordinarily difficult position. On one side, Trump needs to maintain that Congress has overstepped completely, that their demands are unconstitutional, and that he will never comply. That means preparing for protracted legal battles, potential impeachment proceedings, and maximum political confrontation. His base will rally around him being attacked by establishment politicians, but the chaos makes governing nearly impossible. On the flip side, Congress has made a demand they may not have constitutional authority to enforce. If Trump simply refuses and courts back him up, Congress looks weak and foolish for making threats they can't execute. They could pivot to traditional impeachment, but that's a long process requiring evidence of high crimes and misdemeanors. They've essentially backed themselves into a corner where they either escalate to actual impeachment or back down publicly. The tricky part is there's no clear constitutional mechanism for what they're attempting, and creating one on the fly invites its own authoritarian precedents. Now, this whole scenario is causing absolute panic throughout political Washington. According to Axios reporting from January 14th, Republican senators are furiously trying to figure out their position. Do they back Trump against what they see as congressional overreach, even if they're privately uncomfortable with some of his actions, or do they side with the congressional leadership and risk the wrath of Trump's base? Multiple Republican senators reportedly refused to answer reporters' questions about the confrontation, literally walking away when approached. They know there's no safe position. Meanwhile, Democratic leaders are split on whether this confrontation helps or hurts their cause. Some, according to reporting in The Hill, believe that forcing this confrontation exposes Trump's authoritarian tendencies and rallies public support for checks on presidential power. Others worry that Congress looks like it's attempting a legislative coup and that this plays into Trump's narrative of establishment politicians trying to overturn the will of voters. House Democrats who aren't part of the leadership are reportedly frustrated they weren't consulted before such a dramatic move. Things became even more intense when Trump posted on Truth Social immediately after the meeting ended. He called the congressional delegation a group of establishment hacks trying to steal power from the American people. He claimed he had done nothing wrong, that every action he took was within presidential authority, and that he would never surrender to politicians who hate that he's actually fighting for regular Americans. The post got millions of engagements within hours, and Trump's supporters began organizing protests outside the Capitol. Legal analysts are noting that this constitutional confrontation has no clear precedent or resolution path. Former White House counsel John Dean, who was a key Watergate figure, appeared on MSNBC and called this the most serious constitutional crisis since Nixon. He explained that unlike Watergate, where there was clear criminal conduct and a defined constitutional remedy, this situation involves disputed interpretations of presidential power and untested theories of congressional authority. The Supreme Court will almost certainly have to intervene, but the timeline for that could take months, leaving the government in limbo. Former federal judge Michael McConnell told Fox News that Congress was playing with constitutional fire. He argued that allowing the legislative branch to force out an executive through extra-constitutional means would destroy separation of powers. Even if Trump had overstepped, he said, the remedy must be through proper constitutional channels. Creating new removal mechanisms in the heat of political crisis sets dangerous precedents that future Congresses and presidents would abuse. When even Trump skeptics are warning about congressional overreach, that's significant. So let's break down what this could mean, because it's not just high political drama. It has serious consequences for how our government functions and whether our constitutional system can withstand this level of conflict. First up is the immediate institutional paralysis. With the President and Congress in open warfare over presidential legitimacy, governing grinds to a halt. The budget process stops. Judicial nominations freeze. Foreign policy becomes unpredictable when other nations see American government at war with itself. Markets hate uncertainty, and political chaos tanks confidence in American stability. The military and intelligence communities face impossible questions. Who do they take orders from if Congress is claiming the president lacks legitimate authority? What happens if Trump orders military action and congressional leaders publicly state he lacks constitutional authority to do so? We could see a fracturing of government functionality that endangers national security. Military leaders would be caught between constitutional oath and chain of command, with no clear guidance on which takes precedence. Looking ahead to broader political implications, this confrontation poisons any possibility of bipartisan cooperation on anything. If Congress is trying to force Trump from office, and Trump is calling them traitors, there's no middle ground for compromise. Republicans who might have been willing to work with Democrats on specific issues now face pressure to stand with Trump against what his supporters see as a congressional coup. Democrats who might have negotiated on some Trump priorities now face accusations of legitimizing someone their own party tried to remove. But beyond immediate concerns, this is about whether the constitutional system has the flexibility to address scenarios the founders never anticipated. If a president takes actions that Congress views as threatening constitutional order, but those actions don't clearly constitute impeachable offenses, what's the remedy? Do we strictly construe constitutional removal mechanisms and accept that some presidents may abuse power in ways the system can't address? Or do we recognize inherent congressional authority to protect constitutional government, even if that authority creates its own dangers? If Congress succeeds in forcing Trump out through extra-constitutional means, then we're basically saying that legislative majorities can remove presidents they view as problematic without meeting the impeachment standard. That precedent would fundamentally alter separation of powers. Future presidents would serve at the pleasure of Congress rather than having the independence the Constitution intended. That would mean we've moved closer to a parliamentary system where executives can be removed by legislative votes of no confidence. This whole scenario is exposing that our constitutional crisis mechanisms were designed for a different era. The 25th Amendment assumes cabinet members would act independently to check a president, but modern cabinets are political loyalists. Impeachment requires supermajority Senate conviction, but partisan polarization makes that threshold nearly impossible to reach, even when presidential misconduct is clear. We're stress testing constitutional provisions and finding they may not function as intended in our current political environment. This isn't just about Donald Trump and this Congress. It's about whether American government can function when political polarization is so extreme that opposing parties view each other not as legitimate rivals, but as existential threats to democracy itself. When both sides believe the other is attempting authoritarian power grabs, constitutional norms collapse. The system requires shared commitment to democratic rules, and that shared commitment appears to be disintegrating. So here's the deal. Congressional leaders from both parties walked into the Oval Office and demanded that Donald Trump end his term, and Trump responded with rage so intense that witnesses described it as unlike anything they'd seen before. Neither side has a clear constitutional path to victory. Congress may lack authority to enforce their demand, but Trump faces the reality that governing is impossible when the legislative branch views his presidency as illegitimate. This isn't just about one confrontation or one president. It's about whether our 250-year-old constitutional system has the mechanisms to handle modern political dysfunction. When the constitutional remedies don't function because partisanship makes them inoperable, and when extra-constitutional solutions create their own authoritarian precedents, there may be no good options available. When congressional leaders tell a president to leave office and that president refuses. While both sides claim constitutional authority, we've entered genuinely unprecedented territory. If this escalates to competing claims of governmental legitimacy, with different branches claiming authority to act while denying the other's legitimacy, American democracy faces threats it was never designed to handle. So keep an eye on this. The Supreme Court will likely be asked to intervene within days. Congressional leaders must decide whether to proceed with formal impeachment or back down from their demands. Trump must choose between endless legal warfare that paralyzes his presidency or seeking some compromise that lets him save face while reducing tensions. The stakes have never been higher, the constitutional questions never more complex, and the outcome never more unpredictable for American democracy itself.